The three armed men burst through the doors of First National Bank at 11:47 a.m., masks covering their faces and assault rifles in their hands, expecting another easy target. What they didn't know was that the quiet security guard by the entrance wasn't just watching cameras. He was a former Marine Force Recon operator whose close-quarters combat training had prepared him for exactly this moment. The morning sun cast long shadows through the windows of First National Bank as Miguel Rodriguez took his position near the main entrance. It was 8:30 a.m. on a Tuesday, and the familiar rhythm of banking business was beginning. Customers arriving to make deposits, tellers preparing their cash drawers, and the general hum of financial activity that defined his workplace. Miguel had been working bank security for 7 years now. At 39 years old, with close-cropped black hair and a compact athletic build that fit perfectly into his navy blue security uniform, he carried himself with quiet confidence that put customers at ease. To the hundreds of people who passed through First National's doors each week, Miguel was simply the friendly security guard who greeted them with a smile and helped elderly customers navigate the ATM machines. What they didn't know was that Miguel's calm demeanor and seemingly casual positioning near choke points and exit routes came from 12 years as a Marine Force Recon operator, including 5 deployments to Iraq and Afghanistan, where close-quarters combat and threat assessment were matters of life and death. When Miguel had left the Marines 4 years ago, the transition to civilian life had been more challenging than any mission he'd undertaken in hostile territory. After spending his 20s conducting reconnaissance operations and direct action missions in some of the world's most dangerous places, the prospect of a normal job felt both appealing and terrifying. Bank security had offered him something he needed, a way to continue protecting people while using his tactical skills in a peaceful environment. The work wasn't glamorous, but Miguel had found unexpected satisfaction in it. He'd prevented 2 potential robberies through early threat detection, helped de-escalate several tense situations involving agitated customers, and become an unofficial community liaison for the diverse neighborhood that First National served. It wasn't exactly special operations missions, but it was still about protecting people, and that mattered to him. This particular Tuesday had started like any other. Miguel had arrived at 8 a.m. to conduct his morning security assessment, checking that all systems were operational and that the building was secure for the day's business. He'd greeted the tellers and managers, reviewed any overnight security reports, and positioned himself at his usual observation point where he could monitor both the entrance and the main banking floor. During his years at First National, Miguel had developed what Marines called situational awareness, the ability to continuously monitor his environment for potential threats while appearing relaxed and approachable. He knew the regular customers, the typical traffic patterns, and the subtle signs that indicated when something was wrong. The first hint that this Tuesday would be different came at 11:45 a.m. when Miguel noticed a black SUV parked across the street with its engine running. In itself, this wasn't unusual. People often waited outside while family members conducted banking business. But something about the vehicle's positioning and the behavior of its occupants triggered the threat assessment protocols he'd learned in Marine Recon. The SUV was positioned for a quick exit with clear sight lines to the bank entrance. The driver kept checking his watch and scanning the street, behavior patterns that Miguel recognized from counter-surveillance training. Most telling, the vehicle had been there for exactly 15 minutes, long enough to observe the bank's security procedures, but not long enough to attract attention from patrol officers. Miguel casually adjusted his position to get a better view of the SUV while appearing to help a customer with directions. His Marine training had taught him that effective security required balancing vigilance with discretion. Appearing threatening could escalate situations unnecessarily, but missing threats could be fatal. At 11:47 a.m., Miguel's worst fears were confirmed. 3 men in dark clothing burst through the bank's main entrance, their faces covered by ski masks and carrying what Miguel immediately identified as assault rifles, likely AK-47 variants based on their profile and sound signatures. They moved with the aggressive coordination of people who had planned this operation carefully and expected minimal resistance. "Everyone on the ground! This is a robbery! Anyone moves, anyone makes a sound, we start shooting." The lead robber's voice carried the kind of authority that came from desperation and violence. Around the banking floor, customers and employees began dropping to the floor in terror, some crying, others frozen in shock by the sudden transformation of their safe, familiar environment into a life-threatening crisis. But Miguel wasn't dropping to the floor. Instead, his Marine Force Recon training immediately took over, his mind shifting into the tactical mindset that had once made him one of the military's most elite reconnaissance operators. In the space of 2 seconds, he conducted a complete threat assessment that would have taken civilian security officers several minutes to process. 3 armed hostiles positioned in a triangular formation that indicated professional planning. Assault rifles, likely fully automatic, giving them significant firepower advantage. Customers and employees scattered throughout the banking floor, creating both cover opportunities and civilian safety concerns. Exit routes, main entrance, compromised, emergency exit, likely covered, employee entrance, possible but uncertain. Most importantly, Miguel recognized something that civilian security training would never have taught him. These weren't desperate amateurs. Their movement patterns, weapon handling, and tactical positioning suggested military or law enforcement training. This was a professional operation, which meant they were prepared for resistance and wouldn't hesitate to use lethal force. The lead robber moved toward the teller stations while his 2 accomplices took positions to cover the entrance and the main banking floor. It was textbook tactical positioning for a hostile takeover operation designed to control all sight lines and escape routes while maintaining fields of fire. Tellers, start filling these bags with cash. Big bills only, no marked money, no die packs. You have 2 minutes before we start shooting customers. Miguel processed this information with the analytical precision he'd learned during reconnaissance missions in Iraq. 2-minute timeline meant they were operating under time pressure, probably expecting a law enforcement response within 5 to 7 minutes. The emphasis on unmarked bills suggested they understood banking security procedures. The threat against customers indicated willingness to commit murder to achieve their objectives. From his position near the entrance, Miguel had several tactical options, each carrying different risks and potential outcomes. His Marine training had taught him to always consider multiple courses of action and select the one with the highest probability of mission success and lowest civilian casualties. Option 1. Comply with the robber's demands and wait for law enforcement response. Safest for civilians in the short term, but the robber's professional behavior suggested they might eliminate witnesses regardless of cooperation. Option 2. Attempt to trigger the silent alarm and provide intelligence to responding officers. Moderate risk, but might not prevent immediate harm to hostages. Option 3. Engage the robbers directly using close-quarters combat techniques. Highest risk for Miguel personally, but potentially the only way to prevent civilian casualties if the robbers intended to harm hostages. Miguel chose Option 3. Moving with the fluid precision he'd learned during years of close-quarters battle training, Miguel approached the nearest robber from his blind spot. In Marine Force Recon, they called it violence of action, the principle that overwhelming, immediate aggression could often overcome superior numbers or firepower when applied at the right moment. The robber covering the banking floor never saw Miguel coming. Using a combination of hand-to-hand combat techniques and weapon retention training, Miguel disarmed the first robber in less than 3 seconds, simultaneously neutralizing his weapon and using his body as a shield against the other two hostiles. The movement was so quick and precise that most customers didn't realize what had happened until they heard the robber's weapon hit the floor. "Armed security! Everyone stay down!" Miguel called out, his voice carrying the command authority he'd once used to coordinate Marine operations under enemy fire. The lead robber spun toward Miguel's position, bringing his assault rifle to bear, but Miguel was already moving. Years of urban combat training in Iraq and Afghanistan had taught him that static positions were fatal in close-quarters engagements. He had to maintain momentum and continue disrupting the robber's tactical plan. Using the first robber as a human shield, Miguel advanced toward the second position while simultaneously working to secure the dropped weapon. It was a complex tactical maneuver that required the kind of multitasking and spatial awareness that only came from extensive combat experience. "Drop your weapons and get on the ground," Miguel commanded, his voice calm despite the adrenaline coursing through his system. "You're surrounded and outgunned." The bluff was tactical psychology, making the robbers believe they faced organized resistance rather than a single security guard. In Marine operations, Miguel had learned that perception management could be as important as actual firepower in determining the outcome of engagements. The third robber, positioned near the teller stations, began turning his weapon toward the hostages, a movement that Miguel recognized as either preparation for surrender or escalation to lethal force against civilians. Miguel couldn't take that risk. Moving with the combat reflexes that had once saved his life in Fallujah, Miguel engaged the third robber using precise, controlled aggression designed to neutralize the threat while minimizing harm to nearby civilians. The combination of movement, tactical positioning, and overwhelming force application ended the threat in seconds. Within 90 seconds of the robbers' initial entry, all three were disarmed and subdued, their weapons secured, and the immediate threat to customers and employees eliminated. Miguel had successfully transformed a potential massacre into a controlled tactical situation using skills that most bank security guards would never possess. As customers and employees began to realize what had happened, Miguel was already shifting into post-engagement protocols he'd learned during Marine operations. Secure the weapons, check for additional threats, provide medical aid to any injured personnel, and prepare to brief law enforcement when they arrived. The first police units arrived at First National Bank 6 minutes after the initial 911 calls, expecting to find an active robbery in progress. Instead, they found 3 disarmed suspects in custody, a calm security guard providing a tactical briefing, and a banking floor full of customers who were shaken but unharmed. "Officer, this is the situation," Miguel reported to the first responding sergeant. 3 armed suspects attempted a robbery at 11:47 hours. Suspects are disarmed and secured. Weapons are safeguarded. No casualties. No shots fired. I have statements from witnesses and video footage should be available from the security system. Sergeant Williams looked at Miguel with obvious confusion. "Sir, are you law enforcement?" "Bank security," Miguel replied. Former Marine, if that helps explain the tactical response. "Marine? What unit?" Miguel hesitated. For 7 years, he'd deflected questions about his military background, giving vague answers about previous security experience and avoiding discussions of his Force Recon service. But today had changed everything. His military training had directly saved lives, and there was no point in hiding what had made the difference. "Force Recon," Miguel said simply. 12 years, 5 combat deployments. Sergeant Williams's expression changed immediately. "Force Recon? Jesus Christ, no wonder you handled this like a special operations mission. I've never seen anything like what you just did." Over the next several hours, Miguel found himself at the center of an investigation that would eventually reveal the three robbers as members of a criminal organization responsible for 12 bank robberies across 3 states. His quick action and tactical expertise had not only prevented a robbery, but captured criminals who had been evading law enforcement for months. The FBI agent conducting the investigation approached Miguel with obvious professional interest. "Mr. Rodriguez, I need to ask, where did you learn to handle an armed robbery situation with that level of tactical proficiency?" "Marine Corps training," Miguel replied. "Close quarters combat, hostage rescue, threat neutralization. Different environment than I learned it in, but the principles are the same." Different environment? Iraq and Afghanistan, urban combat operations mostly, force recon missions in hostile territory. The FBI agent nodded with understanding. "Well, your military training just prevented what could have been a mass casualty event. These suspects had enough ammunition to kill everyone in the bank, and their pattern suggests they don't leave witnesses." But for Miguel, the most meaningful moment came 2 days later when he received a call from Maria Santos, an elderly customer who had been in the bank during the robbery. "Mr. Rodriguez, I wanted to thank you for saving my life and everyone else's. I was so scared, and when those men came in with guns, I thought I was going to die. But you kept us safe." Miguel was quiet for a moment. "Ma'am, I just did what I was trained to do. I'm glad everyone made it home safely to their families." "Well, your training saved lives. I hope you know that. You're a hero." 6 months later, Miguel Rodriguez was still working at First National Bank, but his role had expanded significantly. He'd been promoted to head of security operations and had begun consulting with other banks in the region on security protocols and threat assessment procedures. His Force Recon experience, once a private part of his background, had become a valuable resource for the financial industry's security community. The attempted robbery had also led to enhanced security training for bank employees and closer coordination between financial institutions and military veterans with relevant experience. Miguel found himself teaching courses on threat recognition and crisis response, sharing expertise that bridged the gap between military combat operations and civilian security challenges. More importantly to Miguel, he'd discovered that his military service didn't have to be something he left behind. It could be something he built upon. The skills he'd learned as a Force Recon Marine weren't just useful for combat missions. They were valuable tools for protecting civilians in any environment where violence threatened innocent people. First National Bank now served its community with enhanced security and confidence, knowing that their safety was protected by someone who had learned to handle threats in the world's most dangerous places. The 3 robbers were eventually sentenced to federal prison, their crime spree ended by a security guard who happened to be one of the Marine Corps' most elite warriors. Miguel Rodriguez, Marine Force Recon operator, bank security guard, crisis manager, teacher, silent guardian.